What's up, everybody? It's Jordan, and welcome to the Sports Suit Hind Show. Today is September 1st, 2021, and in this episode, I am joined by Trey Hill. How you doing today, Trey?
I'm doing well, sir. How are you?
Doing really good. Really, glad you're gonna be on my show. We've had way too many technical difficulties the past couple of days, and we've been trying to schedule some stuff. This is like I believe the fourth time we've tried to schedule a video, and this still nearly did not happen. I'm actually recording on my phone right now. First time this is happening. StreamYard is really messing up on my computer. And, this is Trey. This is your first time on the show. So can you kind of tell some of our listeners, a little about yourself and your podcast and everything like that? What you do?
In terms of where you can find my content at, I write about the Charlotte Hornets at a site called Roll Call. I write about everything else NBA at a site called Hoop Social, and then I have a podcast called Charity Stripe Commentary. If you follow me on Twitter at Finally, you can find links for all that stuff. That's just the easiest way to do it. Plus, you can enjoy my fun Twitter comments from time to time. In terms of sports fandom, I grew up in Illinois. I'm a big Bulls fan. I'm a big Bears fan, but I grew up in Southern Illinois, so I don't actually like the Cubs. I'm a Cardinals fan because I was a lot closer to St. Louis. So, but Bears and Bulls they're like my prime real estate in sports. They're my passions.
I'm not a big baseball guy, but I live a couple hours away from Cincinnati, and for the most part, I've been a big Cincinnati Reds fan, but I just really can't get into baseball like I used to. My dad is a huge Cardinals fan, and I used to be able to go to some of the minor league games in Daytona. That's where the Reds minor league games are, and they would play the Cardinals quite often because they're in the same division. I was able to meet some of the Cardinals players there, met them at a couple of Reds games, and it's like one of those situations where it's kind of hard not rooting for a team because you've been able to meet, some of the players and stuff, and they've been real cool and stuff. But I guess if I had to pick a baseball team, it might be the Cardinals. It's just really weird saying I kind of like the Reds and the Cardinals because that's like saying your favorite teams in the NBA are like the Lakers and the Celtics. You just can't have that. But, we have a lot to talk about. You mentioned your basketball podcast. We're going to talk basketball here in just a second. I'm not knowledgeable about the NBA much. I'm mainly football and wrestling. Speaking of football, there's some big news coming out of the NFL yesterday. Cam Newton was actually released by the New England Patriots, and nobody really expected this to happen, in my opinion. Some people thought that he was expected to start Week 1, and Matt Jones really performed much better than people thought he did. In the preseason. Cam Newton was signed this past all season on a 1-year deal to come back in New England. Last year, they kind of had some trouble because, the whole coronavirus and everything like that. I believe he was exposed. There was times where he wasn't able to play some games. And, I've seen some people say some of the excuses for Cam Newton being released. They are very, very ignorant, in my opinion. I mean, we won't talk about the whole race thing. I mean, you'll hear discussions about how he was cut because he refused to get the coronavirus vaccine. I didn't really think that's really the case at all. You look at Cam Newton, his last 10 starts before joining the New England Patriots last season, he was 1-9 as a starter in the NFL. He is not what he used to be in 2015. He is not nearly as good. He's kind of like, I really don't know who to compare him to, but he's past his prime, and he wasn't really good with
Andy Dalton. He's like Andy Dalton in Chicago.
That's kind of like, that was kind of who I was, really thinking of. And you look of Cam Newton, if he wasn't able to succeed with Bill Belichick, he's not going to be able to succeed with anybody in the NFL, in my opinion.
I will interject there a little bit. I don't think it's that Cam Newton can't succeed in the NFL. I think it's that Mac Jones is a better quarterback than Cam Newton is. And Cam Newton's the type of guy, he definitely wasn't going to be happy riding the bench behind a rookie, especially one that he was competing with. Like, it would be different for him to sign with a team knowing he's a backup, but to lose to a guy and then to be told, hey, you're going to be the rookie's backup, that's just not something Cam Newton wants to do. I feel like he got released almost as a nice thing to do for Cam Newton. He got, like you said, he got COVID last year. He said that he had lingering effects, but even when he did get to play this preseason, he didn't separate himself from Mac Jones, and Mac Jones continues to improve. There's no reason to not play Mac Jones. So to me, anyone that says all of these nefarious things about why he got released, the simple fact is Bill Belichick knows who he wants to be his starting quarterback, and it's not Cam Newton.
And with Cam Newton, I completely agree with what you said there. And with Cam Newton's age getting up there, he's not going to be athletic as what he used to be as well. And that's something you really need to take in consideration. You look at Matt Jones, he's never played an NFL regular season game. If you're a team and if you're playing the Patriots, if you're going to start Cam Newton or Matt Jones, people would rather face Cam Newton because they know his tendencies. They know what he's going to do. With Matt Jones, you don't know his tendencies really. You really don't know his potential. To me, I'm not saying he's Tom Brady at all, but I think you look at those two players, they are similar in their type and their build and everything like that. And obviously we saw how great Brady was in New England. But I just was very shocking to me. I'm very, very excited to see this Matt Jones, situation in New England. Something very interesting too. They actually played the Miami Dolphins week 1. Matt Jones played against Tua in college. Matt Jones was Tua's backup for a couple years with the Crimson Tide. So that's going to be a very fun matchup, a very great game between Miami and the New England Patriots. To me, lots of people are saying, is Cam Newton done and everything like that? I don't necessarily think so. I think maybe as a starter, his career is about over. But to me, I think, some people have said, what team makes the most sense? I think it's obvious. It has to be the Washington football team. And I know I might sound kind of crazy because they signed Ryan Fitzpatrick. I am not sold on the Ryan Fitzpatrick train at all. It's more Fitz-tragic than Fitzmagic, in my opinion. You look at some of the stats, and, he's a great backup quarterback. I think he's one of the better backup quarterbacks we've seen. But as a starter, he is not good. He pretty much, you look at the games where he throws for 400 yards. More often than not, that's when his team loses, or he put that team in a position that they are trailing behind and having to come back and win. And something else, the reason I have Cam Newton possibly going to the Washington football team is the connection with Ron Rivera with the Carolina Panthers. I would really think it would be smart if Washington maybe signed Cam Newton as a backup for Fitzpatrick, or them, dueling it out for the starter, because I think that would be honestly kind of smart. I know some people in the Washington locker room might not like it because you don't know what quarterback will start. But when you have Fitzpatrick, who is really different compared to Cam Newton, it's going to be much harder for teams to prepare for two quality quarterbacks as opposed to one inconsistent one in Fitzpatrick. If Newton gets picked up anywhere, I really think Washington football team makes the most sense.
I think he might end up in playing for Houston with the Texans, signing to be the backup there in case Watson has to miss time. Whether it's he gets he goes away for a few weeks at a time, or it's a situation where week 9 rolls around and all of a sudden a court date gets pushed up and he has to go somewhere else, and you have to just have a backup ready to insert. I really like the Washington pick. I hadn't thought of them, and the connection with Rivera is a nice touch. He'd be able to get familiar with the offense pretty quickly, I feel like. But to me, I think he ends up in Houston with the Texans. They have a big need there with the storm that's kind of just lingering. And you want to be prepared because so much of that offense depends on the quarterback. And I know Cam Newton isn't someone you want starting 16 or 17 games, but for 2 or 3 games throughout the year, he might be the flash in the pan that you need to keep the team afloat.
And it's kind of like what you said with, Andy Dalton. Andy Dalton and Cam Newton, to me, are some of those guys, we've seen throughout the past decade or so, who at times have been quality starters in the NFL. But now they're at the point where if they were backups, both of them would be some of the better backups in the NFL right now. Houston does make quite a bit of sense. I don't think Deshaun Watson plays another snap for Houston because, he once traded. The Texans really have no plans of trading him. But, with all those allegations right now, it's just going to be very difficult, in my opinion, to see Watson perform in Houston again. And, the Texans are going to suck, in my opinion. I think the worst team in the NFL, and it's not really debatable. But I actually did a record prediction the other day. I had them going 0-17. I know I sound crazy, but I really think it's possible.
If Watson doesn't play, what do they have?
They have Tyrod Taylor as of right now, and I don't trust him at all. If they won 4 games last year with Deshaun Watson, they're going to win.
It's very easy to go 0-17. That I like the boldness of the pick because it very firmly plants your flag in the Texans or bad camp. That's a good pick. I like it. I'm on board with it.
I mean,
But,
you can get worse than 0-17.
Right. You mentioned Andy Dalton. We mentioned Andy Dalton earlier, and I'm a Bears fan. I've been a Bears fan my whole life. Everyone knows the history of quarterbacks with them. So when they signed Andy Dalton, this is back before we drafted Fields. I was really excited. He is a competent quarterback. He is someone who can come in and run an offense, which honestly, Allen Robinson, I think, is the most underrated wide receiver in the league. He's had nothing but garbage quarterbacks throwing to him, and he still puts up all-pro numbers. If we can get him and Mooney, who was really good last year, he's a little bit of a breakout guy. If we can get them a competent guy, I was really on board with it. But a lot like the Cam Newton and Mac Jones situation, the Bears lucked into a quarterback in Justin Fields who is clearly better. Like it's not debatable whether or not. It's not something that's even close. And the only reason you don't start Fields is if you're worried that the offensive line is going to get him killed. And you're a little more plugged into the NFL than I am, but what do you think about the Fields situation, and if you think they should start or sit him, and why?
I 100% believe that Fields should not start week 1. And that might be an unpopular opinion. I know lots of Bears fans want Fields starting right away, but you have to look at it. They play the Rams week 1. You mentioned the offensive line. The first week in the first start of his career, you don't want to see Justin Fields getting absolutely humiliated and struggling a lot against the LA Rams. Week 2, they play the Bengals, which, I mean, the Bengals have a nice offense. Their defensive line is average, I would say. And then I believe in a week or two later, they play the Cleveland Browns. So you can make a case has tied for the best roster in the NFL, maybe the second or third best roster in the NFL. And something about when these rookie quarterbacks come in to start, it's one of those situations where once you put them in, they're not coming out. Like if Fields struggles the first week or two, you're not going to put in Andy Dalton. Like that's something that doesn't happen. To me, I feel like Andy Dalton should have this first 4 or 5 games, get kind of the hard part of the schedule out of the way, take the sacrifice, and really pretty much suck for Chicago. So Justin Fields does not struggle on early on, because when you have a rookie quarterback who has a hard schedule to start off and his struggles, that's not going to help his confidence at all. Another thing, he can learn from Andy Dalton throughout these first maybe 4 or 5 games or so. Because Andy Dalton, I would say, is probably the definition of a game manager average. He's been in the NFL for a decade now, which is just, being a Bengals fan, it's just absolutely crazy to think. But to me, I feel like Fields, maybe week 4, week 5, I know it's a very, very unpopular opinion, but I think it makes the most sense, because if he struggles, I mean, he's going to have to play no matter what. Dalton's going to struggle, but after, let's say, week 4, week 5, you put Fields in, he's learned from Dalton. He's learned some things he shouldn't do. And also, it's crazy because we talk about, Chicago with Andy Dalton and Justin Fields. They have a Super Bowl winning quarterback in Nick Foles as well. Obviously he's not going to start, but, Justin Fields can also learn so much from, Foles as well. I think it would make a lot of, Fields could learn a lot from Foles and Andy Dalton. I think week 4, week 5, something like that would make quite a bit of sense for Justin Fields to start. I know it's a very unpopular opinion, but I feel like you have to do the smart thing.
I'm a Bears fan. My heart just wants him to start week 1, come in and just hit the ground running. My head says with the offensive line troubles, it's probably smarter, like you said, to give him a couple weeks to see what Andy Dalton can do with giving these guys a competent quarterback. And honestly, it's a lot like, I don't have confidence in the head coaching staff. I don't have confidence in the play calling. So I don't believe that they have the ability to put Justin Fields in a position to succeed. If these 2 quarterbacks were in New England with Bill Belichick, I would say start Fields week 1, because I would believe that they would be able to put him in a position to succeed. In San Francisco with Trey Lance, I think Trey Lance should start from day 1, because I believe that offense is well built enough that they can run things that play to his strengths, cover his weaknesses, and get him that game time, those reps. But with Fields, I don't have the confidence in the Bears offense to do that. I don't have the confidence in them to develop a young quarterback and not have him get killed. And I hate to say that about my own team. It's really depressing to have to admit, but that's just the sad reality of being a Bears fan.
And you make a great point because you look at the talent that the Patriots have. They have a rookie quarterback in Matt Jones, and to me, I think they're definitely playoff contenders, and they can maybe compete or maybe make it interesting with the Bills and winning the AFC East. I don't think the Bills will win I don't think the Patriots will win the AFC East, but I think it might be a little closer than people think. And then you also mentioned the 49ers. If Trey Lance starts week 1, I don't think that's a horrible idea. The thing with Jimmy Garoppolo, you know what you're going to get. Pretty much average football. Trey Lance, I would say you can make a case, has the most potential of any rookie quarterback in the class this year. And with talent he has in offense and a tremendous cast on defense, I mean, I think they're playoff contenders too, even if Trey Lance starts all 17 games. But the thing with Chicago, they don't have that supporting cast like you mentioned. They aren't going to win these 10, 11 games or anything like that in Chicago if Fields starts, in my opinion. Obviously, especially if he doesn't start till week 4 or 5. But I think getting Dalton the hard part of the schedule, then giving kind of the easier part of the schedule to Justin Fields, let him, see the NFL, game flow, learn from Dalton, learn from Fields. I think that'd be pretty smart. I know it's I think it's the best possible decision for the Bears and Justin Fields. You don't want to rush him in there because when a rookie quarterback like that, like I mentioned, when he comes in, if he struggles a lot, you're not going to put in your veteran quarterback to replace your rookie. Then you're going to have a quarterback controversy already.
So I feel like the toothpaste back in the tube.
What was that?
You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube.
Exactly. But it's going to be interesting with Chicago and Justin Fields. Obviously, Fields has definitely outperformed Andy Dalton in the preseason. If I would have to guess, I would say week 4, week 5, something like that for Justin Fields. But lots of people have complained about it. I really think it can benefit Justin Fields and Chicago in the long run. Keeping on the NFL topics, there was a trade the other day that I was kind of surprised by, but I absolutely love. Former starting quarterback of the Jacksonville Jaguars, Gardner Minshew, was traded to the Philadelphia Eagles. And, Minshew Mania heads to Philadelphia. He was traded for a 6th-round pick. And to me, this further proves, which I've said it from the very beginning, that the Philadelphia Eagles are not high on Jalen Hurts. I don't know why people are so high on Jalen Hurts. It does not make any sense. He started, I believe, 4 games last year. They were 1-3. Like they were not good. As a fantasy standpoint, he's good. When it comes to actual football, he's not good. But it just does not make sense, in my opinion, to have Jalen Hurts as your, quarterback of the future in Philadelphia. You have, Joe Flacco as your quarterback, who honestly I think is a very, very smart move by having him mentor Jalen Hurts and Minshew because, Flacco has been in the league for a very long time. He's won a Super Bowl with Baltimore. And with Jalen Hurts, I'm just not sold on him at all. You look at the Philadelphia Eagles offensive line. They gave up 65 sacks last season over 4 games, which that is just insane. Minshew, he's very, very inconsistent. He struggled at times. But you also have to look at what he had in Jacksonville. He didn't really have anything great. He had DJ Chark. And, for the most part, that was really about it. And I'd rather have Gardner Minshew as a starter right now in Philadelphia than Jalen Hurts. I know it's a very unpopular opinion. But with Jalen Hurts, he's very mobile. He's athletic. But I think he's much more of an athlete than the quarterback. Out of the draft class, when I was ranking quarterbacks, I actually compared him to Braxton Miller. Braxton Miller was a nice quarterback at Ohio State. When it came to the, NFL, transitioning to the NFL, he was actually a wide receiver. Jalen Hurts, to me, I don't think is going to be a good quarterback for the Eagles. And the fact that they traded to get Gardner Minshew kind of further proves that they aren't completely sold on him. And especially that they're not completely sold on him because I believe they just announced yesterday that Hurts is finally the starting quarterback in Philadelphia. The fact that they waited so long to announce Hurts as a starter really shows me that they are not completely sold on Jalen Hurts being the eventual starter in Philadelphia.
I have a theory on Hurts, and I just thought of this. I haven't bounced this off of anyone, so you just get this live. I remember when they drafted Hurts, it was after Wentz had gotten injured. And the Taysom Hill thing was starting to take off in New Orleans with the Saints, having him be wide receiver and he'd run the end around and get the ball and throw it. and just kind of giving the defenses something else to think about, making them hesitate because they have to think. I always was kind of under the impression they drafted Hurts kind of in the Taysom Hill role, but thinking to expand it more and to just have him on the field a lot more often with Wentz. And then with how the Wentz situation went, it just ended up being like, well, we've got Hurts. We spent a lot of draft capital on him. Let's just go ahead and throw him in there. I don't think they drafted Hurts with the idea he was going to be the full-time starter. I think they drafted Hurts thinking he was going to play 80%, 70% of the snaps, line up in the slot, sometimes line up in the tight end position, and do different motions, pre-step motions, help confuse the defense, just play a decoy half the time even. And I think Hurts kind of fell into this starting role. And you're right, he didn't come out firing last year. He went 1-3 in his starts. Bringing in Minshew, someone who succeeded despite everything around him in Jacksonville, that was not an organization built to succeed. He wasn't someone that was brought in to be built around and to succeed around him, and he still found a way to be successful. He's like the rose that grew from concrete kind of thing. So I love them bringing in Minshew too, and I think by the end of the season, he's probably starting for them.
Yeah, I completely agree. Now, I was telling somebody weeks before this happened, I don't think Jalen Hurts is a starter by the end of the season. I have Cameron, tuning in. Thanks for tuning in and everything. Really appreciate it. But with Jalen Hurts, to me, I just do not see it. You look at him, people say he's an athlete. He is an athlete. He's far more athletic player than he is a quarterback. And it's interesting because you look at athletes around the NFL, quarterback-wise, obviously the first person that comes to mind is Lamar Jackson, but he's not nearly as athletic as Jackson. He's not nearly as mobile, and does not have nearly as good as an arm as Lamar Jackson either. And I really agree with what you said there with Taysom Hill. At the beginning, I thought there were, kind of similarities if you can put him, at the Taysom Hill position, kind of like what New Orleans did with Hill. It would make a lot of sense. But what you were saying, it kind of makes, maybe they weren't necessarily in this situation. They didn't think they were going to have to be in this situation. Carson Wentz struggling so much last year, the offensive line sucking. But, with Hurts and Philadelphia, it's interesting. I don't think he's a starter at the end of the year, like I mentioned. Wouldn't be surprised. I think Philadelphia, we already mentioned the Texans are going to suck. The Eagles are going to suck too. I think they're going to have a top 5 pick. Don't be surprised if Philadelphia already picks their quarterback of the future in next year's draft. This quarterback class is absolutely loaded. Makes a lot of sense. And, when you have a top 5 pick and you have an opportunity to take a quarterback when you need a quarterback, you should always take it, in my opinion. You don't want to, not take a quarterback in the top 5, and then you're stuck with, Hurts or Minshew another year. Minshew isn't horrible, but if I'm a team and I'm wanting to win, I don't really trust Minshew to win me a ton of games. He's lost a ton of games last year at Jacksonville, but we already talked about his limited supporting cast. I would rather have Minshew as my starter than Hurts, but at the same time, I wouldn't really want either one of these quarterbacks as my full-time starter if I'm in it to win it in Philadelphia. You're on mute.
Sorry about that. I agree. I'm with you. If I'm Philly, I give Hurts the first half of the season. If he's successful, great. Keep it rolling. If he's not, you throw Minshew in there. If Minshew's successful, great. Keep it rolling. But you still look at the quarterbacks in the offseason, and if you love one, you go get him. That's my mindset. If the Eagles get a top 3 pick next year and they just hate all of the quarterbacks, I think they should just trade back. Wait until you find your guy, and then you just have the team built around him. So if they get that top 3 pick, trade back to 5 and get a lineman. So that way, when you draft a quarterback, he's got, 1 or 2 blue chip lineman prospects. But I'm with you. Minshew, I think he could bridge the gap to the next rookie quarterback, but I don't think he's taking the Eagles to the playoffs.
Yeah, I don't either. And I really believe even if you have Minshew as a starter in Philadelphia, they're still going to finish last in the NFC East. The NFC East, in my opinion, is overrated. But, really, I don't think the NFC East is that good, but they're still going to be last. Kind of switching gears, we have about 30 minutes or so left. Have you heard about the story in Ohio with Bishop Sycamore, the supposed high school?
Yes, that is so.
That is amazing.
It's amazing. It's sad, in some ways that it was that easy to get away with, and it's just very I feel very bad for the high school kids that were exploited because there were a handful of legit, like actual high school kids on the team, and it's just it's crazy. It's unbelievable. It's Manti Te'o on steroids. It's wild.
I mean, yeah, I mean, you mentioned Manti Te'o. It's basically Manti Te'o's girlfriend if she had a school. But I mean, yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody could have possibly imagined this happening, and especially in general. But this game was on ESPN last week against IMG Academy. They are like the premier high school team in the country. They've had so many NFL players come from high school, and you're playing this school that nobody's heard of. You humiliate them. Come to find out, half these guys are junior college dropouts. You're 4 or 5 years older than some of these guys. Their coach has an arrest warrant, and you look up their address, it's like some random person's house. I don't know how they were able to do this for so long. They've been on for multiple years. And it's like it's stupid that they've done this, but at the same time you kind of gotta give props to them in a way because how long they were able to, cover this up. Because this is
I
clearly
didn't know they had done this for multiple years. I was under the impression that this had just started this year.
I believe it was. I believe they've had it for a couple of years because they're. I believe so. I'm not 100% sure on that, but it is really great. I don't get how you're able to do it, and they mentioned, they have tons of athletes who had high Division I offers, and they declined a interview with ESPN before the game started, which to me is really odd. I mean, if you're a high school team, you want to expose your team. I mean, you want to be on
TV. That's the whole reason you're on ESPN is to get these kids publicity.
And the fact that you don't give them any publicity, and then a couple of days later, you give them publicity and all the wrong reasons. I mean, you have, athletes coming out that they had to sleep on floors and just crazy stuff. And I saw a article the other day. It was somebody talking about how, the coaching staff and everything like that they had everything lined up that they were going to be the IMG Academy of the Midwest and everything like that. Clearly, that did not work out at all. I mean, they lost by like about 50 points or something to IMG Academy on ESPN. I mean, very, very, very bad there. I mean, this is something we're never going to see again. This is absolutely insane.
How does this happen is what I want to know. Like how I don't follow football as much as I follow basketball. And I know basketball's kind of been the trailblazers in America when it comes to these like youth programs with all the AAU teams. But they still have high schools that they go to with other students and stuff. I don't understand how. It's just wild to me that it slipped through the cracks. And with COVID being the situation it has been the last few years, it's probably been a lot easier to slip things through the paperwork cracks because it's real easy, to file some paperwork here and there and to make something look more legitimate than it is when people aren't out visiting, out coming to houses, out coming to see, everything. It's just, you're right. I saw a story about one of the recruits. He was like a high school recruit, and they're like, come to play for Bishop Sycamore. And they had told him they were going to be on Netflix. And there's an old Snapchat story of his from way back at the visit, and it's showing off like the training facility. And the caption says, "Catch us on Netflix." And man, that has never been more true. This is made for a documentary series. It's just perfect for it. It's going to be on Netflix and everything else. This is a story that we're going to hear about for 10 years.
I mean, 100%. I believe that might have been the same article, that I actually read. But this is one of the situations, you see IMG Academy on TV playing Bishop Sycamore. I've never heard of that school before. It's kind of weird. they're such a huge school, but I've never heard of them. They're only about 2 or 3 hours away. Come to find out, they're not even really a real school. Like, how do you get all this money to travel and everything like that? Like, to me, that is crazy. I mean, like I said, the coach has an arrest warrant. Like, there are so many different things in this storyline that just does not add up. And this is definitely just one of the all-time just insane sports storylines that you never thought you'd be able to hear. I mean, they need a Netflix documentary. They need a 30 for 30. They need whatever they want, whatever the people want. We deserve it, because this is something that's never going to happen again. We have to know the details and everything, like how all this, went about and everything.
Yeah, it was something, and it's just wild. What's the name of the school they played? Is it IMG?
Yeah.
How does their coaching staff not have more information on these guys to accept the game? Like, because apparently, like, ESPN had outsourced the thing, and they just saw that IMG was playing this other school, and they assumed it was on the up and up. And like, it just seemed like everyone just took Bishop Sycamore at their word that they had all these D1 guys, and they were just like, okay, you can come play. The best team in the country. Just come on in.
And something else that, to me, this kind of proves that how I didn't really know what word you would use, but how ESPN is not nearly as good as people think. I mean, they're having literally a non-high school team televised on their, Friday, whatever day it was, on a game, and they don't even realize that they're not a real school. The fact that to me, ESPN should have realized kind of something was kind of strange when they declined the interview. That just doesn't make sense. Like, that stuff does not happen. You would want to promote these type of guys. And think about this: if Bishop Sycamore, if they would have accepted the interview, to me, I think that would have made people, not really think about, oh, this might be a scam. If you did do that interview, I think people would have, maybe, oh, these players are good and stuff like that. But since you declined it, to me, that was really odd from the start. And the fact that they had their, claim to everybody was they had so many Division I offers. And half these guys are, college dropouts playing in high school football is just absolutely wild to me.
It was never going to work. The second they got that much exposure, those claims were going to immediately be known as fraudulent, and that's just kind of what happened. Like, even if they had done the interviews, we would have watched this game. We would have seen them get destroyed, and the people who care about this stuff would have started dissecting the roster. Well, where are these D1 commitments? Well, who are the ones offering them? And then at that point, they would have started looking into the players themselves. It was a con, and it was a con that they probably made a lot of money on. And then it finally, the cons eventually break, because once they get so big, the bubble pops. And ESPN, I feel like they've just been going downhill for like 20 years since they went away from, kind of being like sports news, and instead they're just kind of like a branch of the sporting world, almost like sports entertainment from pro wrestling. I don't fault them. I don't want to fault them as much if they did go through it like a third party, because if I'm an ESPN producer and I've been working with this company for years, and they come to me and they're like, hey, do you want to air this high school game? It's IMG against this new unknown school, Bishop Sycamore. But the draw is, it's IMG. They're the best team in the country. Do you want to air their game? It's really easy to just be like, yeah, let's slot that in. And then, they get there, a day or two probably before, and actually start digging into the research. And they're like, what's going on? We can't find anything. At that point, you have to cut it off. You have to take the integrity of this. That's where I think 10 years ago, 20 years ago, when they cared about being a sports network, they would have seen that this was suspect and stopped it. But at this stage, they're more about entertainment, and they were like, well, this seems really suspect, so we're going to go ahead and do it, but we're going to question it on air. Because if you go back on Twitter, there's a lot of threads of the announcers casting doubt on this school. But meanwhile, you have 22, 23-year-olds out there crashing into these guys. And I know IMG mopped the floor with them, so it's like, oh, look, these guys, they were older and they still got beat. But imagine if one of those IMG guys had gotten like hit sticked and had a severe concussion by a 23-year-old JUCO dropout. And this guy who we thought was, a 4-star, 5-star prospect, all of a sudden is out because this guy slipped on the field and was playing football against him. It's just a crazy situation.
And you mentioned the decline of ESPN. It just really seems like the past 10 years or so, it just went downhill so much. And the fact that, when you're there and you can't really find anything about the school, like you mentioned, I think that's when you really should call it like your headquarters and everything like that. Like, you should not air this game against college dropouts, against 15 and 16-year-olds. I mean, that's very interesting, but at the same time, that really ruins your, credential, your, network and everything like that in a way. But, very interesting, something we will not see again. Kind of, switching the topic here to basketball just here for a second. I know you're a big Bulls fan, and I can kind of talk about the recent trade with the Cavs and the Bulls.
I liked it for all three teams. It was a three-team trade. It saw Portland get Larry Nance Jr. from your Cleveland Cavaliers. You told me you were a Cavs fan before we got on. I really like that trade for the Trailblazers because it gives them a playmaker at a big position. And with Dame Lillard and McCollum, they're really good at scoring. They need somebody to help playmake for them. With the Bulls, they got their first-round pick that they wanted for Lauri. Lauri Markkanen on the Cavs, I think, is going to be much more successful than people think. He's legitimate 7'1". Like, he's a huge guy, so he's a legitimate big who shoots 40% from the three-point line, and he doesn't shoot from just the corner. He actually he shoots from all around. So you have Garland and Sexton, who are, you have Sexton there. They love to run the pick and roll or the pick and pop, and Lauri's going to give them space to work. He's going to give Evan Mobley space to develop a post game because they're not going to be able to double team him because he's just going to be able to pass out to open three-pointers. Lauri Markkanen's not a great NBA basketball player. He's obviously a great basketball player, but he's not a great NBA player. He's not someone who's going to be rated, very high in NBA 2K. But for what the Cavaliers need to unlock the rest of their team, he provides that, and he provides that in bunches.
And, I was kind of upset that the Cavs traded Larry Nance Jr. because he was actually my favorite, Cavs player. And, I feel like, you trade him away, but I feel like in the long run, you'll probably end up winning this trade, though. Nance, to me, is one of those players who, he's not going to have incredible stat sheet, but if you watch the games, I mean, he's giving effort 110%. He is absolutely phenomenal. And that's something you really don't see in today's NBA with some players.
I was mad that so when the trade broke, all I got texted was Lauri is going to the Cavs. And my immediate text back was, did we get Nance? Because of exactly what you just said. You watch a Cavs game and he might put up, 14 points, 6 rebounds, 3 assists. But he's everywhere on the court. He's just so good. And I'm glad that you told me you're a casual basketball fan, but the fact that you're a Cavs fan and you're like, Larry Nance was my favorite guy, that tells me that you're knowledgeable about it, at least, because he just does all the little things, and he's so good.
And, that's like I was saying. I mean, with Nance, with them drafting Mobley and then signing, Jared Allen to a huge extension, it was looking like he was probably not going to be in the team much longer. Then you have Kevin Love, the worst contract, I would say, in sports right now. And you have Love, Mobley, Jared Allen. You bring in Lauri, and they signed Taco Fall yesterday. Like, this is going to be the tallest team in the NBA. They're going to have, they're going to have Jared Allen like a small forward the way how tall they are. It's just absolutely crazy. But with Nance, it really sucks to see him go. But I feel like I felt like he could have been a big piece of this team in a couple of years. With him and Sexton and Garland, I really thought Lance was the most underrated Cavs player right now. But at the same time, I feel like he's going to do great things in Portland. They've needed some big man presence for quite some time. I feel like he could be pretty decent in Portland. Really interested to see how this trade turns out, and especially to see who ends up winning this trade, because I feel like really all three teams kind of benefited from this.
Yeah, it's 10 years ago, you had your smart GMs and your dumb GMs who weren't embracing the forward thinking kind of process. And you'd see things like Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce get traded for picks that ended up being Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. Today's league is a lot smarter. All three teams had objectives that they got accomplished with this goal. And I think it's a trade that we're going to look at 2 years from now and just think it was one of the most even trades we've ever seen, especially as a 3-team trade. It's pretty often you see teams have trades that work out for both parties when it's just like a 1-for-1 swap. But having all three teams getting something that they wanted out of this, it was really unique.
And it's crazy because you mentioned, the Celtics getting all those picks from the Nets. They got Brown, they got Tatum, and the Cavs got Sexton. I mean, that was a Nets pick that was traded in the horrendous Kyrie trade. I mean, that's one of those trades that really backfired for Boston. Trading away Crowder, Thomas, the Nets pick, Ante Zizic, but who was previously with the Cavs a little bit too. But kind of moving on to the next topic here. We got about 15 minutes left. To me, the most intriguing topic of all the topics we want to be talking about, easily my favorite of all time, Chris Jericho, possibly retiring at All Out. This makes so much sense in my opinion. MJF retiring Jericho at All Out, it really, since MJF turned on Jericho, it was obvious, because you look at this. I mean, Jericho is not what he used to be as an in-ring performer. I still think it's one of the more entertaining wrestlers today. But you go to some of his matches the past 6 months, you can obviously see a major decline in his moveset and his able to perform in the ring. And really, since Jericho lost the title against Moxley last year, the Inner Circle really hasn't really been the same, in my opinion. And with Jericho, there's no better possible person to retire Chris Jericho than MJF. It is so obvious.
Yes.
You can't have anybody. And the main reasoning to me, Chris Jericho even talks about it at times himself, still in promos and interviews, that he beat Steve Austin and The Rock on the same night. That was over 20 years ago, but it's still talked about. Could you imagine MJF retiring Chris Jericho? MJF, in my opinion, is the best heel in professional wrestling right now. And the fact, he's going to get so much heel heat. And then he retires, in my opinion, the greatest of all time. And Chris Jericho, he can brag about that for years. And then when you turn on AEW, you've never watched AEW before. Oh, who's this MJF guy? Oh, he retired Chris Jericho. And that's intriguing. And you want to get more viewers that way. It makes so much sense. You're making your huge star, in my opinion, in MJF, a 10 times bigger star than what he's going to be. A huge more star once he retires Chris Jericho. You're going to get a bigger audience in the future that way with MJF.
They can bump Sammy Guevara up as the new leader of the Inner Circle. They can use that to push him. They've been pushing him on these last few shows, I've noticed. It makes too much sense, like you said. And this is professional wrestling. Let's not forget that. If Jericho wants to announce, because I think the word is he wants to be an announcer, right? He wants to try and do some of that. If he wants to get back in the ring next year, it's really easy to come up with a storyline where we're having an unsanctioned match, and this is not sanctioned by AEW, so this doesn't count against. I think they had one of those with a woman's storyline. Actually, it was an unsanctioned match, and somebody beat Brooke Baker, if I remember correctly. But it's really easy for him to come back if he wants to. And you said it yourself. MJF is the evolution of Chris Jericho as a heel. I feel like I think Chris Jericho sees a lot of himself in MJF in terms of his ability to just work the crowd, create that heel heat. And what better story to tell, what better rub to give than to be the guy who got rid of Chris Jericho. I still remember Brock Lesnar beating The Undertaker at WrestleMania, and I still remember Roman Reigns' promo, "This is my yard now." It's a big deal when you serve some finality to legends, especially legends of that caliber. And Chris Jericho has always believed you go out on your back. I remember him talking about the first time he left WWE. They literally had an angle where he was carried out by security, kicking and screaming. right? And this is probably back in like the early 2000s. And they have this angle where they have him carried out kicking and screaming like a child. And back then, the internet crapped all over it. They're like, "How can you do Chris Jericho like this?" And it came out Chris Jericho had requested it because he thought that's how a heel should leave the company, be carried out by security, kicking and screaming. It's the perfect story for what, like you and I both think, the greatest of all time, the demo god, the guy who tells the best stories. It's the perfect ending to the story of Chris Jericho.
And I mean, 100%, there is no other person in any promotion, WWE, New Japan, whoever, that can make any sense to retire him. I was talking to somebody a couple weeks ago, and they said, if it's not MJF, Kevin Owens should retire him. To me, I mean, I just started laughing because to me, that's so just dumb, and that's a typical WWE storyline, in my opinion, the way it is right now. But with Jericho,
I did really like. I loved the list. I really enjoyed that, and I think Jericho has said that getting to work with Owens kind of relit the fire for him. So I will push back a little. I'm with whoever you talk to on that. If I had to pick someone other than MJF, I think it would be Owens, and I think it would be a good story. I don't think it would be the shitty WWE story.
The thing with Jericho and Owens, I just don't see him going back to WWE to retire, though. I feel like right now.
No. I just meant like if we could bring anyone to AEW to retire Chris Jericho, other than MJF, who would it be? I think Owens is probably my pick also. I mean, I would not have him go to WWE to retire. I wouldn't want them to be in charge of Chris Jericho's retirement story because it wouldn't have been as good as this has been.
And just that whole feud with Owens, to me, I feel like the way Owens turned on Jericho, that was, in my opinion, the best possible way that WWE could have done that. That was perfectly executed by them. No better possible explanation. It was just perfect. And Jericho even said it in an interview. It would almost not happen that way. He begged Triple H to have that in Las Vegas, have that huge celebration, and it worked out perfect. Ever since then, he's been one of the biggest stars in wrestling. You know, had an amazing feud with Kenny Omega in New Japan, a very, very underrated feud. But with Jericho, it's really going to suck to see him, retire and everything. With MJF, I mean, he's going to get so much more heat. He's going to be so much more of a bigger star. And to me, I think like once MJF retires Jericho, in my opinion, that's when, they've been waiting for it a long time, in my opinion. I think that's when they go back to MJF and Sammy Guevara. I think it makes quite a bit of sense. And you look at it, Guevara is going to be ticked off. The MJF retired Jericho. He's kind of been like his mentor in AEW. MJF wins again. You boost him up even more. Then all of a sudden, depending who the champion is, Omega or Christian Cage, I highly doubt that. If you want to put the title on MJF, then I think you still wait because you put him in a title match as high as he possibly is. Retiring Jericho is huge.
I think Omega is going to keep the title from Cage. I think MJF will retire Jericho, and exactly like you said, they're going to have Guevara and MJF feud, and they're both going to get some wins because they want Guevara to be good too. He's a star in the making, just like MJF. But MJF's going to eventually win that feud, and I think he's going to be who faces Adam Page, who is the guy who's going to eventually dethrone Omega from the AEW title. Because then you'll have your face in Page winning the title, beating Omega finally, and then you have this heel, the ultimate heel, the guy who retired Chris Jericho, who just beat up Sammy Guevara and finally ended that feud. I think that's what they build towards when it comes to MJF in the title picture. I think he's going to be the one who goes against the good guy who dethrones Omega.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. MJF and Guevara, when I think of the top wrestlers who's going to represent AEW for years to come, in my opinion, those are the first two people that come to mind. That has potential to be a fantastic feud, just like this Jericho and MJF feud. And with Adam Page against MJF, that makes so much sense. I mean, Adam Page is. I mean, it's evident and obvious. Once Omega won the championship, the next person who was going to win it was Hangman Page. But I mean, it's just really crazy. Look at all of the AEW recent news. I mean, CM Punk is back in wrestling, which is crazy. Daniel Bryan has supposedly signed with AEW. He's going to appear at All Out. They supposedly have a couple other signings. Adam Cole is a possibility. And it's like one of those situations where you get all these guys, but at the same time, you take a big hit. I know he's not what he was when AEW first started, but with Jericho retiring, that's a big downfall. But it kind of cancels out with these signings like CM Punk and Daniel Bryan and possibly Adam Cole. It's just really crazy. I mean, he's wrestled for over 30 years. Definitely my favorite of all time. All the amazing feuds and the thing that I really think separates Jericho from everybody else is creativity. He's been able to have new gimmicks and stuff like that. You look at Steve
Recreates
Austin,
himself
The Rock.
all the time. He's been able to be relevant, not be stale, change things up. And you mentioned that him leaving coincides with a lot of these other guys coming over. And so when these other fans come watch Daniel Bryan and CM Punk in AEW, and the MJF comes on their screen and they're like, who is this guy? And they're like, 5 seconds later, they go, who is this asshole? Because MJF's always an asshole all the time, and he's just the greatest heel in wrestling. They're going to get introduced to MJF as the guy who put Chris Jericho out of professional wrestling. That's going to be a lot of people's first impression of MJF once he does this. And that's the gift of Jericho that's going to give for the next 20 years.
100%. It just makes so much sense. You're going to get eyes on MJF, but more importantly, you're going to get eyes on the product at AEW. It really benefits, the company, MJF's, huge star in the making potential. That really kind of about does it for this episode. We really talked about, quite a bit of stuff. Cam Newton being released, Gardner Minshew being traded to the Eagles, the Cavs trade with the Chicago Bulls, Chris Jericho possibly retiring All Out, and the very, very interesting storyline with Bishop Sycamore. So Trey, can you kind of tell some of our listeners they can follow you on social media and everything?
Twitter, it's where I'm at Final Finally, FINALFINALLY. A lot of people try and do at Final Finale, and it's not that. It's at Final Finally.
Make sure to go follow Trey on that. I'll put the links in the description below. Make sure to follow me, the Sports Dude Honcho, on Instagram and Twitter. I would really appreciate it. Make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. I really appreciate it as well. Thank you all so much for listening, and I'll see you all next time on the Sports Dude Honcho.
Thanks for having me.